The book of Joshua is about God finally possessing the promised land. So God had said, hey, I've given you this land, and what should have been a 2-week journey turned into a 2-generation journey. And because of their own disobedience, there was a price that was paid. But finally, they're going to inherit this land. And so there's a lot of battles that go on in the book of Joshua as God's people are now overthrowing the inhabitants of this land. And yet they experience success after success after success, except one time. God tells his people to send out some spies, and Joshua sends out some spies. Then they see this army called Ai, and they're like, oh, easy defeat, not a problem at all. You don't even have to send your best men. Send your JV team. They'll take care of it. It's like a homecoming win. But as they do that, they actually suffer defeat. It's the only time in the book of Joshua in which God's people suffer a death in their army. And what had happened was they had disobeyed God. And so they went with this great confidence of the success of what was going on. And so that happens in Joshua chapter 7. So in Joshua chapter 8, we hear these words. The Lord said to Joshua, do not be afraid or discouraged. We read that and we think absolutely nothing about it. But whenever we think about it in the context of this book, consider the power that God still spoke to Joshua. In spite of the people's rebellion, ignoring him, their defeat, it'd be really easy for Joshua to think to himself that, man, maybe God's removed his hand. He's no longer with us. We just suffered this tremendous defeat in a victory that should have been really easy for us. Maybe God has left us. But God hadn't left. He keeps on speaking. And that shows us in part the character and the nature of God, that he has this long-suffering nature for us and with us. That there are consequences for our foolish decisions, no question, but God keeps his presence with us. And it's interesting. Then in chapter 8, God's people go on to create this tremendous success against the very army they had just lost to. But why did they win? They won this time because they were absolutely obedient in everything they did. You see, the loss that happened in chapter 7 got their attention to the extent that now, as they went into battle, they didn't define their own strength. They didn't look to their own power. They now knew we have to depend on God in every way. And here's one of the great promises, I think, from this chapter, is when you're with God, even when you're losing, you're winning. When you're with God, even when you're losing, you're winning. Why is that? Because God can take losses to get our attention and to cause us to lean back upon him. You see, if all I ever experience is success after success, I can be really tempted to kind of confuse cause and effect in that and believe that I am causing the effect of winning and slowly separate myself from God. But when God allows me to experience a defeat, a loss, a brokenness of relationship, a career that isn't quite working out the way I thought that it would, something not going right, it gets my attention, which draws me back to him. In this life, you are guaranteed to lose in some ways. And yet, if you are with Jesus and those losses cause you to look more on him and depend more on him, then even when you're losing with Jesus, you're winning.